Commander Lee Hanna rubbed her tired eyes as she sat in the dimly lit control room of Earth's deep space. Communications array. It was 3 a.m., and she had been monitoring signals from distant star systems for 12 straight hours. Most nights brought nothing but cosmic background noise and the occasional automated beacon from human mining stations. Tonight was different. The transmission came through on a frequency she had never seen before. The signal was weak, distorted, and filled with static that made her headphones crackle. But there was something underneath all that noise, something that made her heart race. It was a voice, desperate and pleading, speaking in a language that sounded nothing like any human tongue. Hannah quickly activated the translation software, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. The computer worked for several minutes, analyzing patterns and cross-referencing with its massive database of known alien languages. When the results appeared on her screen, she felt a chill run down her spine. The message was from a species called the Valari Collective, broadcasting from the Kepler 442 system, over 1,200 light years away from Earth. As the translation program converted their alien words into Korean, Hannah listened to what could only be described as a final desperate cry for help. The Valari spoke of an approaching enemy called the Vector Empire. These weren't traders or explorers. They were conquerors who moved from system to system, like locusts. They would arrive with massive fleets, destroy any resistance, and then harvest entire populations for slave labor. The Valari had watched this happen to 47 other worlds, and now their turn had come. But what made Hannah's blood run cold was what came next. The Valari had somehow heard rumors about humanity. They called humans Deathworlders, beings from a planet so harsh and violent that it produced warriors unlike anything else in the galaxy. They had heard whispers that somewhere in the Sol system lived a species that actually understood warfare, not just the simple conquest that most aliens practiced. The Valari were offering everything they had: centuries of advanced technology, scientific knowledge that could advance human civilization by thousands of years, and the eternal friendship of their entire species. All they wanted in return was for these mysterious Deathworlders to help them survive. Hannah played the message 3 more times, checking and double-checking the translation. There was no mistake. This was humanity's first real contact with alien intelligence, and it was a desperate plea for military intervention in an interstellar war. She immediately forwarded the transmission to Fleet Command with a Priority Alpha designation. Within minutes, her secure communicator was buzzing with incoming calls from high-ranking military officials. The message spread through Earth's defense network like wildfire. Emergency lights began flashing in military bases across every continent. Admirals were awakened from sleep. Generals were pulled from family dinners, and the entire United Earth Defense Force was placed on high alert. The age of human isolation in the galaxy was about to end, and it would begin with an act of war. The emergency meeting took place in the deepest level of the Pentagon's classified war room. Admiral Park Jin-woo arrived at exactly 0600 hours, still wearing his dress uniform from the previous night's diplomatic dinner. He hadn't slept in 18 hours, but his eyes were sharp and focused as he studied the holographic star map floating above the conference table. The room filled quickly with Earth's most powerful military minds. General Choi Min-ho came in looking frustrated, followed by Intelligence Director Kim So-min, who was already scrolling through classified reports on her tablet. Defense Minister Yoon Soo-jin took her seat at the head of the table, her face betraying nothing of the stress she felt. The holographic display showed the Kepler 442 system in painful detail. Red markers indicated Dektar fleet positions, while a small blue dot represented the Valari homeworld. The enemy ships outnumbered anything humanity had ever assembled by a factor of 10 to 1. Kim So-min stood first, her voice steady despite the grim news she was about to deliver. She had spent the last 6 hours analyzing every piece of data, they had collected about the Dectar Empire through long-range sensors and intercepted communications. The picture she painted was terrifying. The Dectar weren't just another aggressive species, they were a galactic plague. Their empire spanned nearly a quarter of the local stellar region, and they had perfected the art of rapid conquest. They would arrive at a star system with overwhelming force, crush any resistance within days, and then systematically strip the world of its population and resources. Most species surrendered without fighting, hoping for mercy that never came. Their technology was clearly superior to humanity's. Energy weapons that could slice through the strongest human alloys, shields that could deflect nuclear explosions, and ships that moved faster than anything in Earth's fleet. They had been conquering civilizations for over 3,000 years, and no one had ever successfully resisted them. General Choi Minho leaned back in his chair, shaking his head slowly. He was a practical man who had spent 40 years in the military, and he knew impossible odds when he saw them. They were being asked to fight an enemy that outgunned them, outnumbered them, and had centuries more experience in space warfare. It would be suicide, but Admiral Jinwoo saw something different in the data. He had studied military history his entire life, and he knew that technological superiority didn't always guarantee victory. The Mongols had conquered advanced civilizations with horses and bows. The Vietnamese had defeated the world's most powerful military with guerrilla tactics and determination. More importantly, the Vectar had never faced an enemy like humanity. Every other species they had conquered had evolved on peaceful worlds, planets with stable climates, gentle gravity, and abundant resources. They had developed civilization through cooperation and trade, not through the brutal struggle for survival that had shaped human evolution. Earth was different. Humans had evolved on a world that was actively trying to kill them every single day, crushing gravity that would flatten most aliens, weather patterns that could destroy cities, predators that hunted in packs, and natural disasters that wiped out entire regions without warning. Every human alive was the descendant of survivors who had fought their way to the top of the most violent food chain in known space. The meeting room fell silent as Jinwoo made his decision. Captain Yoon Dae-yoon stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately felt his boots sink slightly into the deck plating of the battleship Taeguk. The artificial gravity was set to Earth's standard, a crushing 9.8 meters per second squared that would leave most alien species gasping for breath within minutes. For humans, it felt like home. He walked through the main corridor, past crew members, who moved with the easy confidence of people accustomed to living under immense pressure. These weren't ordinary sailors, they were the absolute elite of Earth's military, handpicked from millions of candidates, and trained to operate in conditions that would kill lesser beings. The Taeguk itself was a monument to human engineering philosophy. Where other species built their ships for speed and elegance, humans built theirs to survive. The hull was 3 meters thick in most places, made from layered composites that could withstand direct asteroid impacts. The internal structure was a maze of redundant systems, backup power cores, and emergency bulkheads that could seal off entire sections if needed. Every surface was designed with one principle in mind. If something could possibly break under stress, then it needed to be built stronger. The corridors were wide enough for damage control teams to run through them while carrying heavy equipment. The walls were lined with emergency supply caches containing everything from medical kits to cutting torches. Even the lighting fixtures were armored against battle damage. Walking through the ship's various levels, Dae-yoon marveled at the controlled chaos of preparation. In the engineering sections, Chief Petty Officer Nam Ki-wan was running final checks on the fusion reactors that powered their faster-than-light drive. These weren't the elegant antimatter systems that more advanced species used. They were brute-force nuclear furnaces that generated enough energy to tear holes in space-time itself. The weapons decks were equally impressive. Instead of sophisticated energy beams or exotic particle weapons, Human ships carried railguns, massive electromagnetic cannons that fired solid projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. They were simple, reliable, and absolutely devastating against targets that weren't expecting kinetic weapons in an age of energy shields. In the medical bay, Dr. Song Hanyul was reviewing the enhanced surgical equipment designed specifically for combat in space. Human bodies were remarkably resilient compared to most species, but they still needed specialized care when dealing with the unique injuries that came from fighting in zero-atmosphere environments. The crew quarters told their own story. Each bunk was designed to withstand multiple GI forces and rapid decompression. The personal lockers contained emergency gear that would keep a human alive in hard vacuum for up to 30 minutes, long enough to reach a safe area or be rescued by their teammates. As made his way to the bridge, he reviewed the personnel files of his crew on his tablet. Gunnery Sergeant Park Hyesu had survived 3 separate hull breaches during training exercises. Lieutenant Kim Dong-yoon had once piloted a damaged fighter through a debris field while pulling 8 Gs of acceleration. Engineering specialist Lee Chae-won had manually repaired a reactor leak while exposed to radiation levels that would have killed most organic life. These weren't just soldiers. They were the end result of 4 billion years of evolution on the most dangerous planet anyone had ever discovered. The moment the human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, every sensor on every ship began screaming warnings. The sight that greeted them was exactly what they had feared, but still somehow worse than anyone had imagined. Valari Prime hung in space like a wounded animal. The planet's once blue atmosphere was streaked with orange and red, where massive fires burned across entire continents. Chunks of debris, pieces of destroyed orbital stations, and civilian transports drifted through space. Like a graveyard of broken dreams, the Vector fleet was spread across the system in a formation that spoke of absolute confidence. Their ships were beautiful in a terrifying way. Long, crystalline vessels that looked more like works of art than instruments of war. They moved with fluid grace, their hulls shimmering with energy shields that bent light around them like water. Captain Shin Woo-sung stood on the bridge of the destroyer Dokdo, watching the tactical display with growing fury. 63 enemy ships surrounded the planet, systematically destroying anything that tried to escape. Small vector fighters were herding civilian vessels like sheep, forcing them back toward the planet where larger ships waited to capture them. The communication came almost immediately, transmitted on a frequency that somehow bypassed their encryption and played directly through their speakers. The voice was cold, melodic, and completely without emotion. Unknown vessels, you have entered a restricted military zone. Withdraw immediately to a distance of no less than 50 astronomical units, or face immediate annihilation. This is your only warning. On the bridge of the flagship Taeguk, Admiral Park Jin-woo looked at his tactical officer. Analysis, sir. They've got us outnumbered 4-1. Their ships are larger than ours, and preliminary scans suggest superior energy output across all spectrums. Jin-woo nodded slowly. Any reasonable military commander would have ordered a retreat to gather more intelligence and plan a proper assault. But the Dektar had made one critical mistake. They had threatened humans while committing genocide in front of them. Captain Shin didn't wait for orders. He had been born on Jeju Island, where his grandfather had told him stories of Korean resistance fighters who had faced impossible odds against better-equipped enemies. Those fighters had understood something that the Dektar were about to learn. Sometimes the best response to overwhelming force is overwhelming violence. All hands, brace for impact, Shin announced over the ship's intercom. Then he punched the acceleration to maximum and aimed his destroyer directly at the nearest vector frigate. The Dekto was not built for elegant maneuvers. It was a blunt instrument designed to deliver maximum damage in minimum time. As it accelerated toward the enemy ship, every human on board felt the crushing weight of 12 Gs, pressing them into their acceleration couches. For the Vector, such forces would have been instantly fatal. The collision was spectacular. The Decto's reinforced bow punched through the Vector frigate's elegant hull, like a hammer through glass. Both ships exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire system. But Shin had opened his communication channel just before impact, and his words echoed across every frequency the Vector were monitoring. The enemy fleet turned toward the humans with weapons charging, expecting to face a conventional opponent who would try to negotiate or retreat. Instead, they found themselves looking at 14 more ships that were already accelerating toward them at suicide speeds. "Commander." Oh, Yura smiled grimly as she watched the tactical display. The galaxy was about to receive its first lesson in human diplomacy. The Dectar fleet commander stood in his crystal bridge, watching the tactical display with growing disbelief. His fleet had just unleashed enough firepower to glass an entire moon, concentrating their plasma cannons and particle beams on the approaching human vessels. By every calculation his computers could make, those 15 ships should have been reduced to drifting atoms. Instead, the human fleet was accelerating directly toward them. Lieutenant Han Junho gripped the controls of his interceptor as warning lights flashed red all around him. His ship was taking hits that would have crippled any other vessel in the galaxy. But the thick armor plating that Earth's engineers had insisted on was holding firm. The energy beams that struck his hull were powerful enough to melt through standard galactic metals. But humans didn't use standard anything. His fighter suddenly detected 3 Vector interceptors closing in from his starboard side, their elegant forms moving in perfect formation. They were trying to box him in, force him into a predictable flight path where their superior numbers could overwhelm him. Han Junho's response was to pull his control stick hard to the right and slam the throttle to maximum power. His ship immediately began a turn so sharp that his instrument panel registered 15 Gs of lateral force, the kind of maneuver that would have turned any other pilot into liquid paste inside their cockpit. But Han Junho had been born and raised under Earth's crushing gravity. His bones were 3 times denser than those of most galactic species. His heart was a powerful muscle designed to pump blood through a body constantly fighting against massive gravitational forces. His inner ear had evolved to handle the violent motion of a world where earthquakes and storms were daily occurrences. What registered as an impossible maneuver to the Vector was just another day at the office for him. The 3 enemy interceptors tried to follow his turn and immediately lost control as their pilots blacked out from the Jeep. 2 of them collided with each other in brilliant explosions, while the third spun helplessly through space as its unconscious pilot slumped over the controls. On the flagship bridge, the Vector fleet commander was receiving reports that made no sense. His weapons officers were confirming direct hits on multiple human vessels, but the damage reports coming back were minimal. Energy beams that should have cut clean through enemy hulls were leaving nothing more than scorch marks. What he didn't understand was that human ships were designed to operate in the most hostile environment anyone had ever imagined, the surface of Earth itself. They were built to withstand gravitational stresses that would crush other vessels, magnetic storms that would fry delicate electronics, and atmospheric pressures that would implode lighter constructions. Captain Bae Sung-ho was demonstrating this principle in the most direct way possible. His heavy cruiser Busan had managed to get alongside one of the largest Dectar battleships, close enough that he could see the individual crystal formations that made up its hull. The enemy ship was beautiful, elegant, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Bae Sung-ho opened fire with every weapon his ship carried. Railgun slugs moving at a significant fraction of light speed punched through the battleship's energy shields like they weren't even there. Missile volleys, each warhead carrying enough explosive power to level a city block, detonated against the crystalline hull in sequence. The Vector ship, designed for graceful long-range combat, simply disintegrated under the brutal close-quarters assault. The Vector fleet commander watched his energy weapons failed against the human ships, and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his very short life. If long-range combat wasn't working, his warriors would board the enemy vessels and take them by force. After all, the Vectar were bred for physical combat. Each warrior stood 3 meters tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws and exoskeletons that could deflect most. Small arms fire, the boarding pods launched from 12 different Vectar ships simultaneously, sleek projectiles designed to punch through enemy hulls and deliver elite assault teams directly into the heart of their targets. The pods struck the human vessels with tremendous force, their drill tips boring through the outer armor and creating temporary airlocks for the warriors inside. On Deck 7 of the cruiser Incheon, Sergeant Lim Haijin was running routine maintenance on the backup life support systems when the alarms started blaring. The ship's computer announced a hull breach in Section C, and she could hear the distinctive whining sound of Vectar cutting tools working through the inner bulkheads. Calmly set down her tools and walked to the nearest weapons locker. She pulled out her standard combat armor, a powered exoskeleton that weighed over 200 kilograms when fully loaded with ammunition and life support equipment. Most species would need mechanical assistance just to move in such gear, but Haijin slipped into it like putting on a jacket. The first Vectar warrior came through the breach, expecting to face panicked crew members or lightly armed security personnel. Instead, he found himself looking at a human who stood barely 1.6 meters tall, but was wearing more metal than his entire boarding team combined. The alien raised his plasma rifle and fired at point-blank range. The energy beam struck Haijin's chest plate and scattered harmlessly across the reactive armor designed to withstand direct hits from anti-tank weapons. She didn't even step backward from the impact. The Vectar warrior tried to adjust his aim, but Haijin was already moving. She crossed the 3-meter gap between them in less than a second and caught his second shot with her armored hand. The plasma bolt, hot enough to melt through steel, simply dispersed across her palm guards, while she gripped the alien's weapon and crushed it like an empty can. The warrior swung one of his 4 arms at her head, claws extended, putting all of his considerable strength behind the blow. His claws were sharp enough to cut through most known materials and backed by muscles that could lift half a ton. Haijin caught his arm in mid-swing. The impact would have shattered the bones of any other species, but her skeleton had been hardened by a lifetime under crushing gravity. The alien's claws scraped uselessly across her armor, while she held his arm steady. Her return punch was delivered with casual efficiency. Haijin didn't put her full strength behind it. She was aiming to disable, not kill. But even a light punch from a human wearing powered armor carried enough force to send a 3-meter-tall warrior flying backward through the breach he had just created. The second Vectar, through the hole, found his comrade embedded in the far wall of the boarding pod, his exoskeleton cracked in multiple places and his breathing ragged. Before he could process what had happened, Haijin appeared in the breach opening. What followed wasn't really a fight. The remaining boarding team discovered that their carefully planned assault had one fatal flaw. They had never encountered an enemy that treated their best weapons as minor annoyances and their strongest warriors as fragile children. The first reports reached Vectar High Command through encrypted channels. But the encryption didn't matter. Panic has a way of spreading faster than any security protocol can contain it. Fleet Commander Kelthara read the initial combat report 3 times before accepting that it wasn't some kind of elaborate hoax. 15 ships, 15 primitive vessels from an unknown species had completely destroyed a battle group that should have been able to conquer an entire star system. The survivors spoke of enemies who didn't dodge weapons fire, but flew directly through it. Warriors who treated vacuum exposure like a minor inconvenience, and boarding parties that fought with their bare hands against plasma rifles and one dot within hours. Similar reports were flooding in from across the front lines. The humans weren't just fighting the Vectar, they were hunting them down system by system, broadcasting their victories on frequencies that every ship in the sector could receive. Admiral Park Jinwoo had realized something that military strategists had known for thousands of years. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, but fear itself. He ordered his communications teams to compile the most shocking footage from their battles and transmit it directly to the Dektar command frequencies. The broadcasts showed human Marines walking through sections of their own ships that had been breached and depressurized, continuing to fight while breathing bottled air through emergency masks. They showed human pilots pulling maneuvers that registered as impossible on vector sensors. Turns and accelerations that should have liquefied any living being inside the cockpit. Most terrifying of all were the boarding actions. The footage showed humans in their massive powered armor, moving through the Ektar ships like unstoppable machines, shrugging off energy weapons that could melt through battleship hulls and physically tearing apart warriors that had been bred specifically for combat. Commander Namjasu had been monitoring Dektar communications since the first engagement, and what she was hearing painted a picture of an empire in psychological collapse. The aliens had built their entire civilization on the belief that they were the galaxy's ultimate predators. They had conquered 47 star systems because no one had ever been able to resist them effectively. Now they were facing enemies who didn't just resist, they seemed to enjoy it. Admiral Namjisu reported during the daily briefing, where intercepting mass communications across their entire fleet network. They've started calling us the Iron Ghosts from the Death World. Entire battle groups are reporting equipment failures and requesting immediate evacuation rather than engage our forces. The Vectar military structure, built on absolute hierarchy and unquestioning obedience, was crumbling as fears spread through their ranks. Warriors who had never experienced defeat were abandoning their posts. Ship commanders were falsifying damage reports to avoid being sent into combat with the humans. Some of the intercepted communications were almost pathetic. Vector officers pleading with their superiors to send them anywhere except where the human fleet was operating. Veterans with centuries of combat experience requesting transfers to non-combat positions rather than face the Deathworlders. Again, the psychological warfare was working better than any weapon they could have deployed. An empire that had ruled through fear was learning what it felt like to be afraid, and they had discovered that terror was a feeling they were completely unprepared to handle. Admiral Jinwoo watched the strategic map as red markers representing vector forces began disappearing from contested systems. They weren't being destroyed, they were simply leaving, abandoning their positions rather than risk encountering humans. The victory at Valari Prime was just the beginning. Admiral Park Jinwoo stood in the war room of the Tagyuk, staring at a holographic map that showed the full extent of Vectar space. 47 star systems glowed red on the display, each one representing millions of enslaved beings who had been waiting for rescue that might never come. Until now. We could go home, suggested General Choi Minho during their strategy meeting. We've proven our point. The Valari are safe, and the galaxy knows we exist. Jinwoo shook his head slowly. The Vectar will rebuild. They'll learn from this defeat, adapt their tactics, maybe even develop weapons specifically designed to fight humans. If we leave now, we'll just be postponing a larger war. The decision was made. The human fleet would continue pushing deeper into enemy territory, liberating every world the Vectar had conquered over the past 3 millennia. The pattern that emerged over the following months became almost predictable. Human ships would arrive at a Vectar-controlled system, and within hours, the local garrison would begin immediate evacuation procedures. Most of the time, the aliens fled without firing a single shot. Word had spread through their military about what happened to those who tried to fight the Deathworlders. Captain Jang Minseo experienced this firsthand during the liberation of Kethver, a mining world where the Vectar had enslaved over 2 million beings from dozens of different species. Her battle group dropped out of FTL, expecting a fight, only to find the orbital stations already abandoned and the planet's surface installations, running on automated systems. The Vector had fled so quickly that they hadn't even bothered to destroy their equipment. They left behind entire fleets of mining vessels, processing facilities worth billions of credits, and most importantly, all of their prisoners. Minseo walked through the refugee camps that had once been slave barracks, watching her medical teams treat beings who hadn't seen proper healthcare in decades. The diversity was staggering. Tall, graceful creatures with translucent skin, stocky reptilian humanoids with armored hides, and gas-breathing entities that lived in specialized atmospheric suits. Each species had their own story of how the deck had arrived at their homeworld, destroyed their defenses, and harvested their population for forced labor. Some had been slaves for so long that they had never known freedom. Others still remembered their original homes, worlds that had been stripped bare and left as lifeless rocks. One evening, as Minseo was reviewing supply distribution reports, an elderly Valari approached her. His compound eyes, which could see into ultraviolet spectrums that humans couldn't perceive, seemed to shimmer with unshed tears. "Captain," he said through the universal translator, "I must ask you something that has been troubling me since your people first arrived." Minseo set down her tablet and gave him her full attention. The Valeri elder had been helpful in organizing the refugee camps and translating for species whose languages weren't in the human database. "Why are you doing this?" he asked simply. "You could have saved my people and returned to your own space. Instead, you risk your lives for beings you've never met, from worlds you've never seen. Your people gain nothing from this campaign, except enemies and danger." The question caught Minseo off guard. She had been so focused on the tactical aspects of their liberation campaign that she hadn't really stopped to think about the deeper motivations behind it. She thought about Earth, about the long history of human cooperation and sacrifice. Humans had always been pack hunters, but their pack wasn't limited by species or even planet of origin. 6 months after the first distress call from Valari Prime, Admiral Park Jinwoo found himself standing in a place he had never expected to see: the observation deck of a space station that didn't belong to any single species. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, he watched construction crews from 12 different worlds working side by side, building something that had never existed before in galactic history. The Galactic Protection Coalition Station was taking shape around them, a massive structure that would serve as headquarters for the new peacekeeping force. Valari engineers worked alongside human technicians, their forearms allowing them to manipulate complex wiring systems, while humans provided the heavy lifting that their delicate frames couldn't handle. Kethvari miners, freed from slavery just months earlier, used their expertise to hollow out asteroid bases that would serve as early warning outposts. It was a sight that would have been impossible just a year ago. Most of these species had never even known that others existed, isolated in their own small corners of the galaxy by Vector expansion. Now they were collaborating on a project that would protect them all. Commander Lee Hanna approached with a tablet in her hand, the same officer who had received that first desperate transmission from the Valari. She had been promoted twice during the liberation campaign, her communication skills proving invaluable in coordinating with dozens of different alien species and their widely varying technologies. "Admiral, I have the final casualty reports from the entire campaign," she said, offering him the tablet. Jinwoo took the device and scrolled through the numbers. 12 humans wounded, mostly from accidents during boarding operations or construction work. 0 fatalities. He shook his head in amazement. Those numbers would have been miraculous for a single battle, let alone a campaign that had liberated 47 star systems. But then again, humans had evolved on a world where survival required constant adaptation to hostile conditions. What would have been crippling injuries for other species were minor inconveniences for beings whose bones were dense enough to withstand crushing gravity and whose cardiovascular systems were designed to function under extreme stress. There's something else, Admiral Hannah continued. The Coalition representatives have been meeting all morning. They want to formalize the protection arrangement with Earth. They're asking about our terms, what we want in return for continued military support. Jinwoo looked out at the construction crews again, watching a young Valari technician teaching a human engineer how to calibrate their advanced sensor arrays, while the human showed her how to properly secure heavy equipment in zero gravity. Neither species had been able to accomplish alone what they were achieving together. Tell them there are no terms, he said finally. We don't protect the galaxy because we want something in return. We do it because it's what needs to be done. Hannah looked surprised. Sir, with respect, Earth could ask for almost anything right now. Advanced technology, territorial concessions, trade agreements that would make us the wealthiest species in known space. Jinwoo smiled, remembering the elderly Valari who had asked Captain Jang Min-seo a similar question during the liberation of Kethver. Why risk everything for strangers? The answer was simpler than most species could understand. That evening, Admiral Park Jinwoo sat in his quarters and opened his personal log for what he knew would be the final entry of this campaign. Outside his window, ships from dozens of worlds moved in peaceful formation, their different designs and technologies somehow working together in harmony.